This is what happens when you fail to correct malicious behavior on the court, and a few weeks later, that player is over here taking out somebody's knees.
Stephanie White didn't just issue a press release. She dropped a bombshell. After Sophie Cunningham went down with a season-ending knee injury, fans expected the usual coach speak. Next player up, or we'll keep fighting. Instead, White's words cut deeper, sparking panic across Indiana Fever supporters and raising questions about the direction of the entire season.
Sophie Cunningham, unfortunately, is out for the rest of the 2025 WNBA season thanks to the little stunt Bria Hartley pulled.
Sophie wasn't just another player. She was a fighter, a fan favorite, and the emotional spark that kept a bruised and battered roster pushing forward. Losing her to what many believe was a reckless, preventable play wasn't just devastating, it was infuriating. And when White finally addressed it, her tone left fans rattled. This wasn't about one injury anymore. It was about accountability, about whether the league was protecting its players, and about whether Caitlyn Clark should even risk stepping back onto the court. White's words lit a fire that won't be put out easily.
Sophie Cunningham will miss the remainder of the season after suffering an injury during our game at Connecticut on Sunday.
When Sophie Cunningham crumpled to the floor during the Connecticut game, the entire arena seemed to hold its breath. For a player who had built her reputation on toughness, hustle, and a willingness to throw her body into the fire, seeing her clutch her knee sent an instant chill through Fever fans. At first, some thought it might just be another hard fall, something Sophie would shake off, like she had so many times before. But this time was different. The replays showed Bria Hartley lunging low, colliding with Sophie's leg in a way that didn't look like an accident. Within moments, Sophie was ruled out, and later came the devastating update on MCL tear that would end her season.
Sophie Cunningham has a tear in her MCL on her right knee thanks to the little stunt Bria Hartley pulled.
For the Fever, this injury couldn't have come at a worse time. Sophie wasn't simply filling minutes, she had become a central piece of the team's chemistry. Since arriving, she injected energy and grit into a roster that desperately needed leadership on the court.
What kind of adjustments does Stephanie White have at her disposal? What kind of adjustments is Stephanie White capable of to help this team make it to the finish line?
Fans embraced her because she played the game with emotion, always showing fire whether she was scoring, defending, or hyping up her teammates. She was never afraid of the big moments, and she thrived on the crowd's energy. Losing her wasn't just losing points or rebounds, it was losing spirit, identity, and the fight that kept the Fever believing.
If Sophie Cunningham can't come back for the rest of the season, do we even bother playing with fire and bring Caitlyn Clark back? Do we even bother playing with fire, risking potential further injury in bringing Caitlyn Clark back?
The circumstances surrounding her injury only made the pain worse. Fans and analysts pointed out that Cunningham's teammates, Ari McDonald and Sydney Colson, had already gone down with season-ending injuries, both through freak plays. Those were heartbreaking enough.
You blink, Sophie out for the season. In a matter of 10 days, we lost Ari McDonald, Sydney Colson, and Sophie Cunningham for the rest of the year.
But Sophie's case looked different. This wasn't bad luck. This felt deliberate. Bria Hartley's reputation preceded her, and to many, this was the final straw. Dirty play was the phrase echoing across social media, and the frustration quickly shifted toward the league for failing to clamp down on reckless behavior. The emotional reaction from Indiana supporters was immediate. Messages flooded timelines, heartbreak, anger, and calls for accountability. Many had adopted Sophie as a symbol of resilience, someone who fought for every possession in a season that had already been defined by setbacks. To see her sidelined not by chance, but by a hit that looked unnecessary, was gut-wrenching. Fans weren't just mourning the loss of a player, they were furious at the system that allowed it to happen. Inside the locker room, the impact was just as heavy. Teammates knew what Sophie brought beyond the box score. She was the one picking them up during tough stretches, rallying the bench when spirits sagged, and playing with a fire that made everyone else raise their intensity. Now that presence was gone, and the Fever were left scrambling to fill not only her role on the court, but her emotional weight off it. But while fans waited for clarity, the bigger question lingered. How would head coach Stephanie White respond? Would she keep it safe with a generic statement tour? Would she finally confront the league's growing problem head-on? When Stephanie White finally faced the cameras after Sophie Cunningham's injury, nobody expected her to play it safe. But the words that came out of her mouth still left fans stunned. Coaches in the WNBA, much like in any professional league, are known for measured responses, carefully chosen lines that avoid controversy. But this time, White abandoned the script. She didn't simply say the team would rally or that they wished Sophie a speedy recovery. Instead, she laid bare the frustration boiling beneath the surface. Frustration that Fever fans had been screaming about for weeks. White began by acknowledging Sophie's fight, praising her toughness and her importance to the team. But quickly, her tone shifted. She called out the league for allowing reckless behavior to become normalized. She suggested that officials had lost control of the game, and she openly questioned why players like Bria Hartley continued to get away with cheap shots. In a league desperate to protect its stars, White was essentially accusing leadership of negligence. It wasn't just a statement about one injury, it was an indictment of the entire system. Her words hit differently because they came from someone who had seen both sides of the league. As a former player, and now a coach, White understood what it meant to fight through physicality, but she also recognized the line between toughness and malice. In her press conference, she didn't mince words about that line being crossed. For fans already outraged over Sophie's injury, White's statement felt like validation, proof that their anger was justified. But validation wasn't all it stirred. It also sparked panic. When your head coach implies that players aren't being protected, it raises the uncomfortable question: who's next? If Sophie Cunningham could be taken out on a reckless play, what does that mean for Caitlyn Clark, who already has a target on her back every night she steps onto the court? White didn't say Clark's name, but the subtext was loud and clear. Protecting players isn't just about fairness, it's about survival, and the Fever's survival now hinged on whether their biggest star could be kept safe. The fan base reacted in waves. Some praised White for finally speaking the truth, calling her statement the leadership the league had been missing. Others worried that by going public, she might paint an even bigger target on her team, intensifying the physicality they would face in upcoming games. Either way, her words couldn't be ignored. For once, it wasn't a YouTube commentator or a fan forum making accusations. It was a head coach directly pointing at the league and saying, "You failed." And that failure wasn't just about Sophie. It was about the cumulative effect of repeated injuries, questionable officiating, and an erosion of trust between fans and the product they were being asked to support. White's statement crystallized that tension into a single moment. She had dropped a bombshell, and the league had no easy way to clean up the fallout. But while White's comments lit up headlines, there was still a darker shadow looming over the entire ordeal. The player responsible, Bria Hartley. Every scandal needs a face, and in this case, it was Bria Hartley. For years, whispers about Hartley's playing style had followed her across the league. Accusations of cheap fouls, unnecessary aggression, and moments where she seemed more focused on sending a message than playing basketball. To some, she was just scrappy. To others, she was reckless. But after Sophie Cunningham went down clutching her knee, those whispers turned into a roar. Fans weren't debating anymore. They were certain Bria Hartley had crossed the line. The injury wasn't seen as a tragic accident. It was framed as the inevitable result of a player who had been playing dirty all season. Social media receipts poured in. Clips of Hartley yanking ponytails, shoving players to the floor, and undercutting opponents in midair resurfaced. The narrative was clear. This wasn't bad luck for Sophie. This was the final act in a pattern of dangerous behavior. Even commentators who had previously defended Hartley's intensity found it harder to make excuses. One reckless dive was all it took to erase any benefit of the doubt. The outrage only grew because of the timing. The Indiana Fever weren't just losing another rotation player, they were losing a leader at a critical moment. Sophie was embraced by fans as a fighter, someone who gave Indiana grit when their season was unraveling. To lose her because of Hartley's actions was seen as theft. Fever fans felt robbed of not only Sophie's presence, but of the hope she represented. And at the center of that robbery stood Bria Hartley, unrepentant, walking away without facing the consequences. Fans demanded that anger wasn't limited to Indiana. Around the league, fans of other teams chimed in, pointing out how Hartley had also clashed with their players. It painted her less as a one-time offender and more as a league-wide problem. If someone like Hartley could continue playing without suspension, what message did it send? That star players could be taken out without the league stepping in. That the WNBA was willing to risk its brightest talents for the sake of avoiding confrontation. For Commissioner Kathy Engelbert, the backlash was a nightmare. Every call for Hartley to be suspended was also a call questioning her leadership. Fans weren't just mad at Bria, they were furious at Engelbert for allowing her to keep suiting up. The incident exposed a bigger issue, a disconnect between what the league claims to value protecting its stars, growing its fan base, what it allows on the court. At the heart of it all, Sophie Cunningham's career year was cut short by someone who, in the eyes of many, had no place playing the game that way. Hartley's shadow now loomed larger than ever, not just over Sophie's season, but over the league's credibility. But the Fever's problems didn't stop with Hartley, because even as fans demanded punishment, Indiana had to face a grim reality. Their season was collapsing, piece by piece, and Sophie's loss was just the latest domino to fall. By the time Sophie Cunningham went down, the Indiana Fever were already walking a tightrope. The team had clawed its way back into playoff contention, but every step forward seemed to be matched by a setback. Arie McDonald, a spark plug who stabilized the offense, was lost to a foot injury. Sydney Colson, a veteran presence who kept the locker room loose, tore her ACL. And then, as if scripted by fate, Sophie Cunningham joined the list of casualties. 3 players in less than a month. 3 players gone for the year. For any roster, that would be crushing. For a Fever team already battling inconsistency and pressure, it was devastating. What made Sophie's absence feel even heavier was the timing. Just weeks earlier, she had been instrumental in the Fever's short win streak that pulled them back into relevance. Fans could feel momentum building, even daring to whisper the word playoffs. Sophie's grit embodied the team's resurgence, but in an instant, that optimism turned into despair. Cunningham's injury didn't just subtract a player, it ripped out the team's identity from the sidelines. Stephanie White was left juggling pieces that no longer fit together. The roster looked patched, stitched together with hardship contracts and emergency signings. Instead of planning rotations, she was stuck plugging holes. The Fever weren't playing basketball with rhythm, they were just trying to survive, and fans felt it. What was once a season of promise now looked cursed. Each week bringing another blow, off the court, the mood around the franchise soured. Supporters who had once rallied behind the Fever's fighting spirit began to feel worn down by the relentless cycle of injuries and instability. Every time hope rose, it was yanked away. The narrative shifted from a young team learning to win to a franchise snakebitten by bad luck and worse officiating. Local media picked up on the despair, framing Indiana's 2025 campaign as one of the most emotionally draining in recent memory. And hanging over all of it was the specter of Caitlyn Clark. With every injury, the urgency of her potential return grew louder. Could she come back and rescue the season? Or would rushing her back risk the same fate as Sophie, Arie, and Sydney? Fans were torn between desperation for a savior and fear of losing their brightest star. White's own words about protecting players only deepened the tension, turning each game into a countdown. Would Clark suit up? And if she did, would she make it through unscathed? The Fever's season now felt like it was teetering on the edge of collapse. Sophie's injury was more than the latest setback, it was the breaking point that revealed just how fragile the entire operation had become. And as Indiana scrambled to fill her void, attention shifted back to the one player who carried more weight on her shoulders than anyone else, Caitlyn Clark. Because if Clark was the answer, the next question was terrifying. Was bringing her back even worth the risk? With Sophie Cunningham gone, the Indiana Fever suddenly found themselves staring down the hardest decision of their season. Should Caitlyn Clark return to action? Or should they shut her down completely? On paper, the answer looked simple. Clark is the face of the franchise the superstar fans pay to see. the kind of generational talent who can turn a game around with a single hot streak. Bringing her back could stabilize the team, give fans hope, and maybe even salvage a playoff run. But reality wasn't so clean. After watching Sophie collapse from a reckless hit, the dangers of putting Clark back on the floor felt all too real. Clark has already carried an enormous burden in her rookie season. Targeted by defenders night after night, she's been knocked down, shoved around, and hit with cheap fouls that often go uncalled. Fans have noticed, players have noticed, and now even her own coach is openly questioning whether the league is doing enough to protect its stars. Sophie's injury wasn't just another player going down, it was a chilling reminder that Clark could be next. If Hartley could dive at Cunningham's knees without immediate consequence, what would stop someone else from taking a similar shot at Clark? That's why White's statement rattled fans so deeply. While she didn't explicitly say Clark's name, the implication was impossible to ignore. If the league can't protect players, then putting its biggest draw back into the chaos might not just be risky, it could be reckless. And yet, for the Fever, shutting Clark down comes with its own problems. Without her, the team's offense sputters. Attendance dips. National broadcasts lose interest. The Fever aren't just managing a roster, they're balancing the entire weight of the WNBA's visibility on Clark's shoulders. For Clark herself, the dilemma is even more personal. Known for her competitive fire, she's never been the type to sit out if she can play. Teammates and fans admire her toughness, but that same toughness could put her at risk. Coming back too soon, in a season already branded as cursed, feels like playing with fire. Still, Clark's presence is the only thing that keeps the Fever relevant in a league where momentum and storylines drive fan engagement. Every day, she remains sidelined. The Fever drift further away from the playoff conversation, and the league loses valuable star power. Fans are torn. Some argue the Fever should prioritize the future, protecting Clark at all costs, even if it means conceding the season. Others demand her return, desperate for something to hold on to in a year full of heartbreak. On talk shows, podcasts, and Twitter feeds, the debate rages. Should Clark risk it all to fight for a broken roster? Or should Indiana wrap her in bubble wrap until 2026? That's the essence of the Caitlyn Clark dilemma, a tug-of-war between the desire to win now and the need to safeguard the future. And while Indiana wrestled with that impossible choice, they made a move that showed just how desperate the situation had become. When news broke that the Indiana Fever had signed Shea Petty to a hardship contract, the reaction was less excitement and more resignation. Fans weren't celebrating a savvy midseason pickup, they were shaking their heads at what felt like another desperate bandage on a roster bleeding out. For a team already gutted by injuries to Aari McDonald, Sydney Colson, and now Sophie Cunningham, the move symbolized survival more than strategy. It was the kind of signing that screamed, "We just need bodies to finish the season." Shea Petty's story itself is unique. At 36 years old, she isn't the fresh-faced rookie hungry to prove herself. She's a veteran whose career has been defined by persistence rather than stardom. She spent much of her 20s outside the WNBA, grinding in overseas leagues, before finally breaking through in 2019. Since then, she's had flashes of reliability, decent shooter, a steady ball handler, but never the kind of player who could change the direction of a franchise. Her career averages just under 6 points, a couple assists, a few rebounds tell the story of someone who can fill a role but not replace a star. And that's exactly what frustrated fans. Losing Sophie Cunningham was devastating because of the energy, toughness, and leadership she brought. Shea Petty, while experienced, simply isn't that kind of player. She isn't the one diving for loose balls, firing up the crowd, or swinging momentum with an emotional outburst. She's a placeholder, a steady hand, a name to pencil into the rotation so the Fever can keep playing 5-on-5. No disrespect to her game, but for a fan base already drowning in disappointment. The signing felt like a reminder of how far the Fever had fallen. The reaction online mirrored that frustration. Supporters wanted answers, accountability, and a clear plan for the future. Instead, they got a journeyman guard signed out of necessity. On Twitter, comments ranged from sarcastic jokes about who is Shea Petty to genuine concern that Indiana was simply patching holes without addressing the bigger problem, why so many of their players were getting hurt in the first place. Still, not everyone dismissed the move. Some pointed out that Petty's experience could at least stabilize a fractured locker room. She's been around the league. She knows what it takes to grind through tough stretches. And maybe her professionalism could rub off on younger teammates. In that sense, she represented calm amid chaos. But even the most optimistic takes admitted the obvious. Petty wasn't a solution. She was a stopgap. For Stephanie White, signing Petty was less about boosting performance and more about showing the team wasn't giving up. With Cunningham sidelined, Clark uncertain, and the roster reeling, she needed anyone to keep the Fever moving forward. Petty was that someone. But the fact Indiana had to dig this deep into the veteran pool underscored how bleak things had become, and while Petty quietly joined the roster, the noise outside kept growing louder. Fans weren't focused on who the Fever signed, they were focused on who the league had failed to protect, which led to the next stage of the crisis: full-blown fan backlash. The moment Sophie Cunningham's season-ending injury was announced, fans erupted on. Their anger only grew louder after Stephanie White's bombshell statement. What started as grief over losing a beloved player quickly transformed into fury at the system that allowed it to happen. Social media lit up with calls for accountability, and Hartley became public enemy number one. Hashtags demanding her suspension trended on Twitter. Clips of her past cheap shots resurfaced across TikTok and Instagram, shared with captions like, "How is this player still in the league?" For Fever supporters, this wasn't about one foul, it was about a culture that let it fester. But the backlash didn't stop with Hartley. Fans turned their attention to the WNBA itself, specifically Commissioner Cathy Engelbert. The argument was simple: if stars aren't safe, fans won't stick around. Sophie wasn't just a role player, she had become a face of Indiana's resurgence. And losing her to what appeared to be a reckless hit felt like the league had failed her. One comment summed it up: "How many stars do we have to lose before Engelbert wakes up for a league trying to grow viewership and expand its fan base?" This was the worst kind of spotlight. Local Fever fans were especially incensed. Indianapolis had embraced Sophie, rallying around her fiery personality and the grit she brought to a team often overshadowed by bigger markets. Her injury wasn't just a basketball loss, it felt personal. Season ticket holders voiced frustration that they were paying to see a depleted roster, patched together with hardship contracts, while officials and leadership offered no protection. For a fan base that had been starved of winning seasons for years, the sense of betrayal ran deep. Nationally, media outlets picked up on the outrage. Debate shows questioned whether the WNBA was doing enough to protect its players, while columnists pointed out that repeated injuries to stars like Sophie and the uncertainty around Caitlyn Clark threatened to derail the league's momentum. The narrative shifted from an unlucky injury to a preventable disaster, and the WNBA found itself on the defensive. The Fever's own fans didn't hold back either. Some demanded Hartley be banned outright, others called for Engelbert's resignation, and many began questioning whether they could continue supporting a league that seemed indifferent to player safety. The anger wasn't just about wins and losses, it was about principle. Fans wanted to know, if Sophie could be taken out so easily, what's stopping the same fate from happening to Caitlyn Clark or any other star? The backlash carried financial implications, too. Disillusioned fans talked about canceling tickets, skipping broadcasts, and pulling back their support. For a league still fighting for mainstream recognition, losing trust was far more dangerous than losing a single season. Sophie's injury had struck a nerve, and the explosion of anger proved it wasn't going away anytime soon. But as fans unleashed their fury, one chilling realization emerged. This wasn't just an Indiana Fever problem. Sophie's injury was a symptom of something bigger and issue that threatened the credibility of the entire WNBA, and that's where the story turned from outrage to existential crisis. Sophie Cunningham's injury wasn't just a setback for the Indiana Fever, it was a mirror reflecting the WNBA's deepest flaws. The league has been riding a wave of growth, fueled by Caitlyn Clark's arrival and a surge in national attention. But moments like this threaten to undo that momentum. Fans don't just want highlight plays and dramatic finishes, they want assurance that their favorite stars will actually be on the court. When injuries pile up, especially ones tied to reckless or dirty play, it shakes confidence not only in teams, but in the league itself. The Cunningham incident spotlighted a recurring theme: inconsistent officiating and lack of accountability. Hartley's dive wasn't an isolated incident. Across the league, players and coaches have quietly complained that physical fouls are too often ignored or punished inconsistently. When referees let those moments slide, the message becomes clear: physical intimidation works. For role players looking to slow down stars like Clark or Cunningham, that's an open invitation to push boundaries. And for fans watching at home, it creates the perception of chaos rather than competition. Stephanie White's statement amplified the problem. Coaches rarely speak so bluntly, which is why her words carried such weight. By publicly questioning whether players are safe, White inadvertently challenged the league's entire credibility. How can the WNBA market itself as a league of rising stars if those stars are constantly sidelined by questionable officiating and unchecked physical play? It's not just a competitive issue, it's a business one. Every time a marquee player goes down, ticket sales dip, TV viewership suffers, and momentum slows. Cunningham's injury hurt Indiana, but the ripple effect extended to the entire league at the same time. The league's response, or lack of one only, deepened fan skepticism. Engelbert's silence in the days after the injury was interpreted, not as patience, but as indifference. For fans already on edge, it reinforced the belief that leadership was detached from what actually happens on the court. In an era where every controversy trends instantly on social media, silence speaks volumes. And in this case, it said, "We don't care enough." But beneath the outrage lies opportunity. The WNBA is at a crossroads. It can either continue brushing off incidents like Cunningham's as unfortunate accidents, or it can use them as a catalyst for reform. Stronger officiating standards, harsher punishments for reckless fouls. And more vocal leadership would go a long way toward restoring trust. Protecting players isn't just about fairness, it's about ensuring the league's future. Because here's the haunting truth: if the WNBA can't safeguard its stars, what's to stop fans from walking away? Sophie's injury may be one storyline, but it's symbolic of something larger. Every star sidelined chips away at the league's foundation. The Fever's nightmare season might just be the wake-up call the WNBA can't afford to ignore. And that leaves us with one final question. If this league can't protect Sophie Cunningham, what hope is there for Caitlyn Clark and the future of the WNBA? Sophie Cunningham's injury wasn't just another unlucky break. It was the moment the cracks in the WNBA's foundation became impossible to ignore. Bria Hartley's reckless play, the silence of Commissioner Cathy Engelbert, and the raw frustration of Stephanie White all collided to create a storm that fans won't forget anytime soon. For Indiana, it means another season derailed, a roster patched with desperation moves, and a fan base left clinging to hope. For the league, it raises a bigger, more dangerous question. Can the WNBA survive if it can't protect its stars? Sophie's loss is heartbreaking, but the real fear now centers on Caitlyn Clark. Every decision moving forward, whether to bring her back, how to officiate her games, and how to enforce accountability, will define not just the Fever's future, but the credibility of the entire league. One injury may have changed everything, and the ripple effects are only beginning.